Hi, I'm Tony.
And I'm Patrick.
Welcome to Cave to the Cross Apologetics. We are working our way through James Anderson's book, Why Should I Believe Christianity? And we're up to the 5th chapter.
We're flying through.
That's right. Yeah, this one is pretty straightforward. Some of the arguments are a little bit complicated, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward.
That's our job.
That's right, yeah. To break those things down, right? Bite-sized pieces. So this chapter is entitled, God is Not Silent. Mm-hmm. So he's going to argue here. He's going to tell us in just a second, we'll see this, that there's solid grounds for believing that God has spoken in the Bible, right? So that's what the issue is here that he's going to talk about. So he says that Christians believe not only that God is real, but that God has spoken to us in the Bible. It will be argued, he tells us in this chapter, that there are solid grounds for believing that this is true. But we want to concede, he says at the outset, that the arguments developed here aren't the primary basis for Christian convictions about the Bible. All right, so if you're not, if there aren't good arguments, or at least he's not going to give us good arguments for Christian convictions about the Bible, what are good Christian convictions about whether or not, God has spoken in the Bible?
Right. Well, we'll figure this out. So he starts out from that introduction of hearing God's voice. And so he says, when a person calls you up and says, hey, it's me. Probably most of the time you're going to know who that is.
Right.
Well, why? Well, because somebody on the other end probably knows who you are really well in order to do that. I mean, maybe in the Midwest where, hi, it's your mother. I know my own mother's voice, but that's what we do. So one reason is that only certain people would identify themselves to you in that way.
Right.
Another reason is that you would immediately recognize their voice. So you've talked to this person before. It's not been, through chat or anything, but you've heard their voice enough to know that someone would be so rude or so familiar with you
you don't do a logical deductive argument about
female, older, maybe, blonde hair. Oh no, I can't.
Yeah, and he says Christians typically don't deduce that God is the ultimate author of the Bible via some elaborate reasoning process, right? He says instead they directly perceive that God directly perceives that God is speaking to them through the Bible. They read the Bible or they hear it read to them, and they recognize the voice of God, similar to your person over the phone. Right. Mm-hmm.
So if you're serious about investigating Christianity, but you haven't read the Bible, or at least significant parts of it, then if nothing else, you owe it to yourself to read it with an open mind and an expectant attitude. So he says that he would recommend, however, that you don't read it from the first page to the last page in order that it's usually arranged. And as people who, you become a believer, you're like, all right, I'm on fire. And then you get to Leviticus and Numbers, and you're like, I am so confused over why.
My fire has so drenched.
Why do I care about these people? Or they had 12 oxes and 6 calves, and each tribe did this. It's like, okay, can't you just, sum it down by all tribes did this sacrifice and let's get there. Yeah. Well, there's reasons for that, but also, we're also coming kind of into it. We're Christians. We believe that Jesus Christ is the path that leads us to salvation, the connecting with God. And so we're almost start in the middle, and then we have to move backwards. But also, you could start in Genesis, and that's important. And if you read John, there's some parallels there.
Right.
So that's because the Bible is really a collection of books, a library of books.
Yeah, so it's a collection. It's not just one. Right. I mean, it is to a certain extent. Yeah. It is, we would believe the whole voice of God, right, written down. Mm-hmm. But, there are many authors throughout history that have written various portions of the Bible. And so, it's a collection of books.
Right. It's why we don't include the Shepherd of Hermas, or hopefully not the U.S. Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. We save those for other collections.
Yeah, so how should we read the Bible? Well, he suggests that we read the 4 Gospels first, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Makes sense.
And then after that, read the book of Acts, which records some of the remarkable events that followed the crucifixion of Jesus. And then he suggests that we read some of the letters written by Paul. Specifically, we could start with Romans and then go to Ephesians, right?
Yeah.
So there's lots of doctrines that are talked about in those particular books,
Right.
To give a feel for exactly what Christians believe, right?
Maybe one day we'll do the book on Romans so that we can have a good old breakdown of that chapter by chapter.
Right. And then after that, he says you can dive into he would suggest you can dive into the Old Testament, beginning with the book of Genesis and Exodus, which kind of lay a foundation for the biblical worldview. So that's kind of how he suggests we could, we start reading the Bible. Right?
Yeah. But we're obviously not here to support breaking of the Old Testament away, because, as we learned from G.K. Beale, or actually we have another interview with a pastor interview coming up where we're interviewing a pastor on the importance of the Old Testament and how he teaches from it in a seminary type setting. And so be on the lookout for that, and how important the Old Testament is and how much it's quoted. And I'll put a couple links to the Old Testament and the New Testament, I believe, is a Beale's version, and there's a shorter version, and then of course he does a longer version that he takes from. So as Anderson has noted previously here, most Christians don't come to believe the Bible is God's word through sophisticated philosophical, scientific, and historical arguments. Now you can, and some people do, and there are good philosophical, scientific, and historical arguments, whether you like them or not. Yeah. But there are many paths that people take to recognize the Bible is God's word. But instead, they come to perceive it immediately through a direct supernatural illumination. And there's something particularly odd, or there's nothing particularly odd or outlandish about that, especially if we understand who God is.
Yeah.
If God can give us ordinary sensory factors that allows us to perceive things in the natural world, then he also has the power to give people direct insight into spiritual matters, specifically to perceive his own voice speaking to them in the Bible.
Right.
And obviously, this is, again, a worldview understanding of, if God is like this, then why couldn't he, kind of curry up this supernatural understanding to recognize it? The Bible says, I'm the good shepherd, and my sheep hear my voice. There's no, and once they get to page 17 on my manual, then they understand. Oh, okay. 2 + 2 = 4. Here we go. Bing, bang, boom. We're off.
Right.
That's 17. Once you get to 17, then you're good.
So, and this is kind of an interesting, parallel, right? He's given us sensory faculties, our 5 senses, and that sort of thing, that we can, perceive physical reality. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't we expect him to give us some type of spiritual, sensus divinitus, or something like that, so that we could perceive spiritual reality, right? And so that's the claim that he's trying to make. We're allowed to do that. But he tells us that there are excellent reasons to believe that God has spoken in the Bible, and so he wants to kind of explore those in the rest of this chapter, right? All right, so here's a preview of what he's going to talk to us about. He says that, he suggested in chapter 2 of this book that one of the tests for evaluating worldviews is the test of coherence, right? The more coherent a worldview is, the better it fits together internally, and the more reason we have to believe it, right? So if it fits together, that is at least an indicator that it's true, right? Because what we're trying to determine with these various tests is it true, right? And so coherence is an important factor. We might call it an epistemic value, is what they call it in epistemology.
There you go. Right? Epistemology.
Yeah.
The study of knowledge. That's the easy one.
So he said he's going to make the case that God speaks worldview is more coherent than a God doesn't speak worldview. Right? And further, he says we're going to consider the alternatives. Wow. So he's going to kind of do a little criticism, right? He's going to look at the alternatives. The Christian worldview is the only credible candidate among the God speaks worldview out there, and so he's going to consider various alternatives to the Christian worldview.
Right. So in a previous chapter, he argued that only a worldview centered on a transcendent, absolute, personal creator, God, can make sense of the things that we take for granted. But why should we think this God would speak to us? Well, Christianity emphasizes that God is personal. So he's a being. He doesn't just create the universe, winds it up, sets it down,
right,
and says, all right, good luck.
Right. Nor is he some type of force or power or something like that just, blows everything together or whatever. And then
so no Star Wars.
Yeah.
We get lightsabers, maybe, but we can't turn off the light switch with our minds yet. Okay. All right. But why is this the case? Why does kind of God reveal himself in this personal way? Well, Christianity also teaches that God created humans in his own image. That is to say, we humans are also personal beings who reflect God's personal attributes at a finite level.
Right. So God is a personal being, and when he creates, he's created, at least us anyway, humans in his own image. So we're personal beings as well, right?
Right.
And that's the point he's trying to make here.
Mm-hmm. So we can think of it again like our computer programmer. He has a input device called keyboard that he then can direct the code to do certain functions, whatever it is. Go find this picture. Go
make this calculation
right.
so that he doesn't have to do it,
right.
or that sort of thing.
Yeah. So we speak in ones and zeros, and he speaks in twos and threes and fours and ones and zeros as well.
That's right.
So God is infinite. We're at a finite, but we still reflect certain characteristics being made in his image. So that's definitely a big.
So all of these types of things that allow us to actually communicate.
Yeah. Right. So we're able to think, reason, exercise imagination, make plans and choices, show affections, and enter into loving relationships with each other. A lot of those things come into play when we talk about the Trinity and why that's important. So again, just to add a little caveat that he doesn't, but I think understanding God as a Trinity is very important
right.
in kind of I think we talked about it before of the one in the many, why we should understand in that way. And also there's no need to learn love because he is able to love within the Trinity.
Yeah. So this Trinitarian, there's a by virtue of being Trinitarian, there's relationship,
right?
There, right. So God is a relational God, and relationship is apparently extremely important to God, right? And so He created us to have relationship, right? He created us in our image with one another. We can do that, and so this implies that God intended us also to have a personal relationship with Him, right? As well as with one another. So the idea that a personal God, would create other personal beings, but not relate to them, right, in a personal way, he says would be incoherent, right? It doesn't make sense on the face of it. So he created personal beings who are able to relate to one another to also be able to relate to him. Right.
But how would God enter into a personal relationship with us? That's the question we want to ask now, is what would characterize that relationship? Well, when we reflect on the personal relationships we form with other human beings, it's clear that language is an essential component of those relationships. We talk about how important it is for a mother and father, or parents to talk to their children, even at an early age. It helps to start developing that relationship, and you can tell, even though a baby can't communicate in the language
verbally,
but they can recognize voices of their mothers, and we do it even we see that even with animals as well, and even our relationship with animals, like a shepherd calling his flock. It's an interesting word picture that the Bible uses as well. And so you have flocks that come together. Shepherd says, "All right, let's go," and the sheep that are part of his flock only go with him, and the other ones stay.
Kind of interesting, And with regard to this issue of language, obviously he's talking more broadly than just verbal language, right? I mean, it's all kinds of language, written language, sign language, whatever. These are essential components for relationships, right? Any type of language. Like you said, with the child, obviously the child, a very young child, baby, doesn't have verbal communication skills, at least in terms of sophisticated language like we do. They do cry and that sort of thing. But still, there's a component of communication.
Right.
And so that's what he means here, is this broad concept of language.
Right. We talked to Pastor Justin McCoy that we just finished up with. He talked about having students, the importance of students going overseas and interacting with new people or and on mission trips. And part of that is learning to communicate with people who don't always speak the same language as you, but you recognize them as just as human as you are.
Yeah.
They have the same desires, feelings, thoughts, love, affection, hates, and it's just in a different setting, but also it kind of opens your mind out to different experiences that people have around the world in their different settings. But communication seems to be one of those ways that we can really get to know somebody through those experiences.
Yeah. I can remember when I took one of those trips to Ecuador, and we were in the Amazon jungle with this tribe, and we didn't speak their language, they didn't speak ours, but we were able to communicate through various ways. So when my canteen got empty and I needed more water, I let them know. They grab it from me, go up a river somewhere, get some water, and bring it back, and I was supposed to drink that water. And I did, what else you going to do?
You made it.
Yeah.
You made it, yeah.
I lived to tell the tale.
So Fountain of Youth, Ecuador. So if a personal God is going to enter into personal relationships with his personal creatures, personal, and the normal means of initiating and sustaining personal relationships is through language, well, then we should expect God to speak to us. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's the logical flow that he's got there.
All right. So we expect God to speak to us, right? The question that he wants to deal with now is how has God spoken?
Well, if God doesn't speak to me audibly, face to face, then obviously that's the only way.
Yeah. There's no
other way.
That's right.
This has to be the way.
Well, he said, God might well speak to us in a variety of ways and means, right?
Okay.
Nevertheless, there's a good reason to think that if God were to speak to us, he would do so in a publicly accessible way, right? After all, the most important things that God would have to say to us would be applicable to human beings in general and not just to individuals or subgroups, right? The most important things. But he says that in that case, God's words would have to be generally available to human beings in general, at least in principle. Right.
So it's certainly possible for God to speak to humans privately and individually. Christianity doesn't deny that, right? And the Bible indicates that it occasionally happens, although significantly the Bible still fills us in on what God said on these occasions.
So we get a sneak view of what these individual private quotes communications are, right?
So some of those people probably wish they were a little bit more private. Yeah. Really, everyone's going to read this for the next how many years? That's a lot of years. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the kind of misnomers that people get out of Christianity or Judaism is that, this was a normal thing that happened. God always kind of operated in this way, big booming voice, pillar of fire, cloud, smoke, all this stuff. It's like, no, these are incidents in time that are being written down because they're so special or because they're there to communicate certain principles to us in a way of God interacting with his people. And so it's not, the Bible's not strictly that because it also involves relationships among people, but it usually has a relationship.
So I shouldn't expect a pillar of fire to appear so that I know which way to go when I'm driving.
That's just one of the reasons.
Okay.
Yeah, you could. I mean, God could GPS us all, I guess, but it seems like there's it would lose its speciality there.
Maybe, yeah.
So. The thing is, though, if God were to speak only privately and individually, there would be no public, objective way to resolve disagreements about what God has said.
Right.
It would always be one person's word against another.
Right.
Again, unless you want God to change kind of our entire makeup and make us kind of more robotic way of forcing us to believe this, then it removes that relationship learning aspect, the sanctification process that God has determined that He wants from His people.
Right.
So if there's a divine revelation which is objectively knowable and publicly available, something that anyone in principle could point to as God's word, then there's a meaningful basis for settling such disagreements. So if we had something that says, well, all right, you say that that you've started this group and God has revealed to you that you can have as many wives as possible. But the Bible here, or this collection of sayings that is authoritative to us, is what God said, says opposite. We can probably say that you're wrong.
Right. That God didn't say that to you, right? Because we have a public, accessible revelation, right?
And a God who is unchanging. His moral law never changes. We can still rely on the moral aspect, whether is working with a particular people civilly or ceremonially might be for that particular group of people, while still revealing His moral character and what He would want from us.
Yeah, good. And so he says that it makes sense to assume that God then would arrange His communication to be written down, right? So it's publicly accessible, it's objective. We can objectively view it and deal with our various what we believe, how God has spoken, and that sort of thing. He says the content of a written communication is not only publicly accessible and objectively verifiable, but it's also preserved for future generations. And so if it's reasonable to believe in God, it's also eminently reasonable, he tells us, to believe that there are divine scriptures, written records of God's verbal communication to us. Right? Why don't we just end it here and pick up the rest of this next time?
Yeah. So next time we'll cover kind of comparing what Christianity says, or the possibility of it being revealed to God revealing Himself in other ways in other religions. So it'll be a good one. So join us next time.
We'll see you next time.